Good afternoon and welcome to Chicago Humanities Spring Festival. I'm Philip Bahar, I'm the Executive Director of Chicago Humanities, and it's great having a full day of events all across the Illinois campus today, and we're glad that you're with us. This is one of 50 conversations we're having in the Spring Festival. We have performances and other events throughout the season as well. And today, across the campus, we're exploring contemporary art and creativity, which our speakers certainly fit into that category, American politics, as well as technology and artificial intelligence. And we'll be ending our day with John Maida from Microsoft, the head of AI and design there. And I can think of no better venue than Illinois Tech Campus with its great history of innovation, architectural design, and otherwise for so many of these conversations. So we're so glad to be partnering with Illinois Tech this year. We have a number of other great events between now and June. Some amazing musicians and storytellers such as Andrew Bird, Reggie Watts, Questlove, and the jazz musician Brad Meldau. And we also have programs on the presidency and activism from the 60s to the present with Pulitzer Prize winning historians John Meacham and Doris Kearns Goodwin. So hopefully you can all come out for that. Before we begin, I want to thank our presenting partners, Builders Vision, Friedman Properties, and the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, and our spring season sponsors, the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation and Nielsen IQ. And thank to all of you in our audience who are members and donors. Really, it is your philanthropy, your support, and you're bringing your friends and neighbors to our events that allow us to do these programs all across the city. So thank you for that. Finally, a special thanks to the Terra Foundation for American Art and their citywide Art Design Chicago initiative. This program is one of those events, and it's highlighting the artistic design heritage of Chicago from its founding to the present, and it's been an amazing project 5 years ago, and then this coming year. So with that, I'm gonna welcome Eva Silverman from the Art Design Chicago team to introduce our speakers. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Philip, and hi, everybody. It's great to see so many folks out today. As Philip said, I am Eva Silverman. I am from the Terra Foundation for American Art. And today's program, as Philip said, is presented as part of Art Design Chicago, which is an initiative of the Terra Foundation in partnership with artists and organizations across the city. Through more than 35 exhibitions and hundreds of public events, like this one, Art Design Chicago highlights the city's artistic heritage and creative communities. And we are proud to partner with the team here at Chicago Humanities, who have been passionately bringing such conversations like this to life for you, their curious and committed audience, now for 35 years. So now I know you probably all know a lot about Hebru and Amanda, but their bios are very worth repeating, so I'm going to share a bit of information about them. Hebru Brantley creates narrative-driven work revolving around his conceptualized iconic characters, which are utilized to address complex ideas around nostalgia, the mental psyche, power, and hope. The color palettes, pop art motifs, and characters themselves create accessibility around Brantley's layered and multifaceted beliefs. Majorly influenced by the south side of Chicago's Afro-Cobra movement in the 1960s and 70s, Brantley uses the lineage of mural work as a frame to explore his inquiries, applying a plethora of mediums from oil, acrylic, watercolor, and spray paint to non-traditional mediums such as coffee and tea. Brantley's work challenges the traditional view of the hero or protagonist, and his work insists on a contemporary and distinct narrative that shapes and impacts the viewer's gaze. Recognized internationally, Hebru Brantley has exhibited in cities worldwide, including Art Basel, Switzerland, Art Basel, Miami, Art Basel, Hong Kong, and Frieze, London. Brantley has been recognized in public publications including CNN, the Chicago Tribune, Forbes, WWD, Hyperbeast, Complex Magazine, the Chicago Sun-Times, and the New York Post. Collectors of his work include LeBron James, Jay-Z and Beyonce, Lenny Kravitz, George Lucas, and Rahm Emanuel, among others. And Brantley has collaborated with brands like Nike, Hublot, and Adidas. In October 2019, Brantley opened an experiential fine art installation fueled by the narrative of his characters Flyboy and Lil Mama. The 6,000 square foot installation in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood hosted over 23,000 ticketed guests and offered them limited edition merchandise. Brantley currently resides in Los Angeles, where he is expanding into content creation, including the adaptation of the Flyboy universe through his media company, Angry Hero. And Brantley earned a BA in film from Clark Atlanta University and has a background in design and media illustration. And now on to our moderator, Amanda Williams. Amanda is a visual artist who trained as an architect at Cornell University. She is a 2022 recipient of the MacArthur Genius Fellowship. Amanda has exhibited widely, including the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Venice Architecture Biennale, the MCA Chicago, and at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation in St. Louis. She is co-designer of a forthcoming permanent monument to Shirley Chisholm in Brooklyn, New York, and part of the museum design team for the Obama Presidential Center. Williams has been recognized as a USA Ford Fellow, a Joan Mitchell Painting and Sculpture Grantee, a 3 Arts Next Level awardee, and is the inaugural Artist in Residence at Smith College. She is a highly sought-after lecturer, including a 2018 TED Talk. Amanda sits on the boards of the Graham Foundation, the Black Reconstruction Collective, the Pulitzer Arts Foundation, and the Terra Foundation for American Art. Her work is in several permanent collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago and the Museum of Modern Art. Her projects have recently been published in Black Futures and Radical Architecture of the Future. Amanda lives and works on the south side of Chicago. So now, please join me in welcoming Hebru Brantley and Amanda Williams.
Hello.
Hola.
We're fancy. We were like, these bios are too long.
Way too long. We're going to have to trim those.
So the number one question I got asked when we agreed to do this was, can you get me tickets? The second number one question was, in the front, there's my children. The second question was, I didn't know you all knew each other. And I was in shock that people don't know that we know each other. So I thought we would start off by talking a little bit about our history, kind of our trajectories, and why it is that even though the style of our work is so different, that there are a lot of synergies. I think oftentimes when people imagine artists, they don't understand that we are interfacing with each other, even if there's not a kind of outward proof of that through the work, that we really are support networks, and it doesn't mean that we have to be like in the studio making paint together or whatever. Like like there's a kind of ecosystem that exists. And especially in Chicago, you're seeing right now, particularly Black and Latino artists, you're seeing this kind of rise in our celebrity globally, but really we are, kind of this loose network of people that really are cheering for one another, if not working together. And so you have a history in this immediate neighborhood. You grew up not far from here. You went to De La Salle. I taught at IIT in architecture for a long time. But I think really our connection started probably just before your work was going to explode with Flyboy, and I was starting to paint the houses. So maybe you can take us back a little bit to that moment and kind of your memory also of Chicago. Like, we are children of the Oprah, Michael Jordan, pre-Obama era. Like, Obama is great, but like, we just thought we were supposed to be phenomenal. Like, when you grow up and that's what your television is showing you every day, like, that's the energy and the ethos just in the Chicago air in the 80s.
For some, not all. For some.
So, okay, expand.
Well, I mean,
I'm gonna be Oprah now, expand.
First of all, you're really good at this, so you might want to consider like a side career.
Okay.
I think that there's outliers, right, within every community. And, for me, I grew up over here, and, the Bronzeville community when I was coming up was very different than how it is now. It wasn't a community anymore, right? It was, a bunch of people disconnected. And, for me, the thing that I really appreciated about the area was the history, but the idea of sort of what it used to be and what it probably could be again. But in that, I didn't really have a lot of connectivity to the arts and to, other creatives, as I was coming up. In high school, for example, to keep people from, talking shit and getting into fights, my shtick was I could draw. I'll draw you a tattoo, right? And, oh yeah, he can draw. Like that became a part of my identity, but it wasn't a thing that was celebrated within, the community.
Larger culture.
Right, and so, it's having to go out and sort of find other outliers within Chicago. And I think even now, like when we talk about, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit. Oprah.
No, go for it.
But, you and I, knowing one another and a few other artists from Chicago or live in Chicago that I know, I think it's a result of people with similar missions, right, and similar intention, obviously going about it, everybody has a different path towards that, but recognizing that, right, and it's just an energy about it to where it's like, it's a supportive system that we kind of foster and create, because I don't personally find too many people like yourself, right, like a Theaster, or people that are like in the same space that aren't competing, but are celebrating and bringing in, others like themselves.
So, but by the time I met you, I feel like, to your point, there's a mission, but there also is like a swagger that I don't feel New York has. You can speak on whether LA has that. But there was never a moment that either of us, or at least this is the way you outwardly presented to me, right? There was never a moment where we didn't think we would be here. Like, we didn't think we would be here. We didn't think we'd be all of that stuff that people are reading. But we had such a commitment to the work we were making, and such an excitement and a kind of curiosity about the work. It was like, yeah, so what I'm gonna do is, and then it's gonna explode, right? Like, that was our mindset, and I don't think that we imagined that we'd rocket this quickly to these kinds of stages, but I do think that was an energy. So do you feel like, because art or drawing, or like what your interests were, and you weren't pigeonholed as an athlete, like you had a whole different interest, do you feel like you had to cultivate that kind of confidence, or was it always there? Because that's what I mean about, like, I just had an assumption that you're supposed to be excellent. I have great parents that did that, but also that just felt like the energy. Do you know what I mean? So do you feel like you weren't sure, and then that evolved, and that the work you were making started to help with that, the characters, and kind of your inward imagining of these things? Or do you feel like that was always there? So by the 2010s, we were like, and then, like, we had visions. You know what I mean?
But I think a lot of that came from our own ignorance, right? Like,
this is also true. We didn't know nothing.
If we sat and thought about what it took to get there, as opposed to I'm going to get there, we probably move a lot slower, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I grew up in a situation where I had one parent that fully nurtured my creative, and then one parent that didn't fully get it, right? And not only parents, but family members, et cetera, that kind of tried to pull that out of me, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a lofty dream, on to the next thing, find stability. But for me, that was the only dream. That was the only thing that, like, made me happy. That was the only thing that allowed me to function as a human, right? And so it was make or break. There was no other thing.
Yeah.
It was only this. And so, but again, with that ignorance of, like, it's just this, I just kind of forged ahead, and obviously, we are where we are.
So maybe talk a little bit about, because I think I experienced this as well. When you are what people are now calling a multi-hyphenate. When you can do a lot of things, it sometimes throws people off, right? They're like, pick something.
Yep.
You're scattered. You're never going to be good at anything if you don't pick one thing. And I think for you, the breakthrough was when you created Flyboy and Little Mama. For me, it was color theory. But talk about the work that led up to that. Do you feel like there was a moment where you made that conscious decision to hone in on those things? Do you feel like those two characters really were bringing together all the work? The early work of yours that I saw was when it was much more black and white and almost like glyph, and then there would occasionally be like a completed colored component where there'd be one figure that stood out. And I always loved that work because I could see the whole story coming and then sort of a thing. And not that it's not, that Flyboy and Little Mama are not great, but those were like whole worlds almost.
Sure.
Right? So in my mind, they're like the almost the backdrop or the kind of, all these movies now have the origin movie after we've seen the whole story, right? Like it's the origin movie. You're gonna do the movies for them, and then we're gonna go back to the origin story. So can you talk a little bit about that trajectory? Was it really that linear, or were you really just figuring things out and then this sort of second idea emerged?
The truth is I've always been all over the place. You know, you talk about multi-hyphenates, I've always had aspirations to do probably way too much. And that is true in the work that I've always done where, like I work on anywhere from 5 to 10 pieces at a time. But that doesn't mean that those 5 or 10 connect narratively, you know, aesthetically. Like they can literally be just thoughts or, you know, moods. And I think what I tend to do is try to, if there's 3 pieces within that 10 that I connect to, I try to connect them, right? But when it came to the early work I did, I think that there was, I think it was a response to the market at the time. And, you know, I went to Clark Atlanta after college. You know, I've talked about this a lot in the past, but like I moved around a lot, right? Because I didn't have any formal arts training or education. And so my arts education became crashing on people's couches in different places in the world, and then like finding that person or those people that do it and just watching over the shoulder, right? This was, you know, kind of predating like the YouTube era. And so I had to find the people that were, you know, actively making to understand what making meant. And, you know, within that time, moving back to Chicago's, you know, art scene was, you know, vastly different, obviously, than what it is now. And there was no place that I fit. And I think that there was like a determination to fit, right? And not only to fit, but just kind of like move some shit out the way. Here I come, you know, I want to do this. And I think that like I took slow steps with the work to kind of, you know, raise my hand like, hey, I'm here. But my approach was always, you know, one, like more the rebel, more I'm gonna, you know, ask, you know, I'm gonna ask for forgiveness, not permission type of vibe. But I think that, you know, as I got to know people within the space and as I got to understand what art was, because I still didn't know. I knew what my art was, but I didn't know what you know, fine art was, right? I had a very narrow, very, very narrow view of what it was. But as I got to understand it, I think that I tried to intentionally, you know, course correct the work and guide the ship towards something that became a bit more palatable for my immediate audience. But what I mean immediate audience, I mean the Chicago, right? Black collectives and collectors and so forth. And it's not to say that that wasn't me, because absolutely it was, but I felt like I was catering to, right? And it wasn't, you know, it's a bit of like, it wasn't all I was, right? It wasn't, I didn't feel like it was a full outpour of what I could do and the things. And so, you know, looking at what I loved and what I appreciated growing up as a kid, what were the things that made me happy? And, you know, a few of those things that just held through, you know, I'm a 40-year-old man, child, right? Like, I'm a big kid.
Very big.
And, you know, the things that made me happy were, you know, graphic novels, comics, anime, you know, cartoons, anything within, you know, popular culture, cult culture, right? These cultish films and animations that I would watch. And so, you know, I just thought about like that, and then I thought about, you know, growing up reading Sunday funnies, like reading Charles Schultz, right, the Peanuts, and how he took these kids and gave them so many layers, right, to the point where they became palatable, not even really for kids. The aesthetic was for kids,
Yeah.
but the thought and the idea and the narratives behind it was more for adults, right? It was adult humor. And so, I kind of applied that method within the fine art space and creating characters. But again, it was all by accident. I kind of fell into it. It was a thing that, like, you know, Theaster had done Yamaguchi, was it Yamaguchi, right? The Institute things. And it was kind of around that time, you know, when he was doing that, and I had the idea, because we were talking all the time, and had the idea to do, as kind of a lark, like this found animation, this cartoon that sort of didn't exist, right? But it put, you know, these black children into, you know, the space of Bugs Bunny or Batman, or, you know, in that conversation. And so to do it as a lark, like, I found this stuff, right? And then I kind of appropriated it and so forth. And the response was really good. And it was to the point where, like, maybe there's something here. And it also just felt fun, right? And I think that was the most important thing. Like, whatever you do, you don't want it to, now, I mean, I don't give a damn if you're a pop singer or you're making millions of dollars. Like, at some point, what you do is gonna feel like work, right?
Right.
But for the most part, it didn't feel like work. It was fun. Like, I ran to it, right? I didn't walk to it all the time. And so, you know, being able to kind of recraft a narrative and not worry about being heavy-handed, because whatever I wanted to say came through the, you know, the mouths of babes, so to speak. And so that was kind of, you know, where everything was born. And, you know, I've told the story a million times of, like, you know, wanting to put historical context and have something weighted, you know, with what I do, with what I create. And so that was, like, again, in finding, like, the Tuskegee of it all, and, you know, incorporating that into the what if this kid had, you know, there was a relationship to that history and that level of heroism, and, you know, and how to tie these themes together. And so, yeah, it was just, again, it was a lot of fun, and it kind of grew into this thing that I didn't anticipate it being.
So we've seen a lot of the work. You are hugely prolific. Can you talk a little bit about, like, it is work now for both of us, and we were just talking about, you know, me having to let go of the reins a little bit in terms of support to produce the work. But how often, talk a little bit about when you were starting and now that you have a whole operation, how often are you drawing? Are you sketching? Are you making work? Like, I feel like there's a freedom where you make it and you're on to the next, you're on to the next, you're on to the next. And maybe that also comes with the idea of comics or illustration, and that's a medium where you're able to kind of,
the turnover is fast.
So how, then and now, how often do you feel like do you still have that sketch pad with you every day? You know, are you tagging sometimes? You know, like, what's that?
Well, I mean, honestly, everything is the same. You know, I still create at a very, like, feverish pace, only because, well, for a few reasons. I never drew that parallel to, you know, graphic novels and comics and all of that, but it makes a lot of sense. Though I didn't come from that world, again, I appreciated it and was, like, still am fully in it. But I think for me, it's more of a matter of, like, boredom, where, you know, I have these ideas, I get so excited about an idea, and then I know that I have to see it through, otherwise I won't see it through, right? Otherwise it'll just, like, stay half painted for years, and I don't get me wrong, I still have a ton of that. But yeah, like, I you know, I think it's just important for me to kind of, you know, put the sort of the heat to it,
Right away.
when it's there, right? And a lot of the stuff that I do, majority, I'd say probably 80% of the work that I create, people won't see maybe until I die, maybe not then. Like, I'm actually moving studios in LA, I was telling you, and I was trying to take a count of all the works that I have currently in the studio. And most are finished, unfinished, halfway, whatever. But I had 135 paintings that were stretched on canvas, and I'm like, yo, I have a problem.
Your collectors do not think you have a problem. They're like, what? Wait a minute, what? Yeah, but I mean, I think that you, for me, have a freedom of being able to, and it wasn't that I thought they were incomplete, but I loved, again, the works that were more glyph or had these limited colors, because they really are vignettes about like getting to a whole story. For me, that's what it feels like. Like, you're just making it, and 20 years out, you'll be able to put together something that you didn't realize was really the build up to this, not just Flyboy and Little Mama, but all of these kind of components.
The world.
Yeah. I want you to talk a little bit about the range of media. So I know that some of that is a strategy in terms of what you were talking about early on about like marketing or marketability, but I too also see it as a kind of a maker's energy, where you're like, there is no medium that I will not transgress. So talk a little bit about the confidence to really transform these characters across everything, and also that kind of reach into popular culture. Some of that was marketing, but do you also feel like that's a moment of, we're MTV children, right? So we saw sound and image all together, right? It was in words. That was normal for us, that words should be on the screen at the same time as these components. So, you got shoes, you probably got wallpaper, I don't know, you got, if you don't, you should. No, if T-shirts.
Right.
And people are like losing their minds. They're like, yo, the shirt comes out at midnight. Do you know him? Can you call him? I'm not calling him for a T-shirt. But but you really are kind of transcending that range and keeping the excitement across these media. And we often have peers or artists historically that are not just, but like just a sculptor,
Right.
just a painter, just printmaking. And so talk a little bit about those decisions that sometimes get made, maybe for strategic reasons, but are there also these kind of creative moments where you're like, I need to see that as a larger than life thing, or a commission might come. Talk a little bit about that process.
Well, I think when it comes to the merchandise component of my business, I've spoken on this before, so if you guys have heard this, apologies. But, I'm a collector, right? I grew up a collector. I didn't have any money, but what little money I did, or I could beg, borrow, or steal, like I went and bought basketball cards, comic books, a bunch of other stuff that was worthless now. But even as a kid, like little kid, playing with action figures and things like that, like that's where I sprang from. And so it's always been, the idea has always been cool to me of having things that are accessible, right? Because I think art for a lot of people is so inaccessible, right? Like, there's a finite number of people that will go to museums, right? Consistently, without being taken there, without, a school project, whatever. And I'm one of those people that comes from that space, right? I didn't grow up in that space. And even now as a parent, like, I get invited to openings every weekend or every other, and I'm like, I can't go to all this stuff. Like, but the people that are there typically are a certain type of folks. And it's nothing, I appreciate the folks that, that are the patrons for the arts, but there's so many other people that feel like they don't have access to. And so for, a lot of what I do, I want to be able to speak to those people as well and kind of bridge that, right? And if I can be sort of a conduit for someone younger or even older to kind of come into and understand, fine art, that's kind of the goal. And, I looked at, like, again, I'm a pop art kid, heavy pop art kid, right? Like, looking at Warhol, and shit, Basquiat now, right? Like everybody, who doesn't know Basquiat now, right? But why is that? It's because rappers are screaming the name. It's because there's countless books everywhere. It's the accessibility of the artist now, right? There's so many people have monetized off of the name. Mm-hmm. And for me, I want to do that shit while I'm still living, right? I want to make things that allow people to participate in my vision while I'm here, not when I'm gone and I have no say of what's made and what's created, right? So, thank you. All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was that's always been the goal. It was like, once I get enough money, I'm gonna start making some shirts and da-da. But that was also that was a part of my understanding of the art world, right? When I was in college, that's how I made money. I hand-painted shirts, jackets, hats. College students have disposable income, and, I'm gonna take it. I'm coming for it. So, and at the time it was fashionable, right? And it's one of ones. And then, stylists. I went to Clark Atlanta, right? It was like around that time where Atlanta started to really, develop their new identity, in Black culture, right? Mm-hmm. Within music at first. And so there was plenty of stylists who were like, hey, Atlanta's also this big, right? Mm-hmm. So if you do a thing, you're gonna stand out. And people come in, I need a shirt for Usher, if he has a video shoot, or he has this, or I need a shirt for drama, or whoever, right? And sure, I'll oblige. But again, it was a way for me to practice the craft. Mm-hmm. And I always understood that it was a means to an end. Like, it was a way to elevate my skill set and get out there. But there's a power in teas. Like, you think about, like, how do you get propaganda out there, right? How do you spread people's message? Look, when Obama ran on the Hope campaign, who did he go to? Shepard Fairey, right? And through doing that, he engaged an entire audience that no other president or presidential candidate had ever, right? And it was brilliance. And so for me, I'm not saying that I'm trying to do that, but it just, I look in the audience now, and I've seen a couple people as I walk in that have on things that I've created. That's the greatest feeling in the world, right? Like, I made that because I thought it was cool, and you thought it was cool too. But again, that was sort of the mindset around that. I hope I answered the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Speaking of brilliance, can you talk a little bit about the original vision for Nevermore, and then the process of pulling that off during the pandemic, because that was brilliant.
Thank you. So when I first started, when I first started doing Flyboy, Lil Mama, when I first started just really doing the characters, there was never like a prescribed narrative, right? I would just inject them in narratives. And for the past, I want to say 8 years, every time I had a moment, I would write down a thought, right, about where Flyboy comes from, what the world is, yada, 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 and building a Bible. And I'd gotten to the point where everything, I'd spent, a full year, just, that was it. Besides painting, I was just really intent on making sure that this Bible made sense, and it's 400 plus pages. It's kind of ridiculous. I had way too much time on my hands. But, I wanted to do a graphic novel. But then I thought, like, how can I bridge two audiences and, from sort of the art world to, again, people that are interested and invested in narrative-based, works, how can I bridge that? And so the idea was to do an immersive exhibition around the origin and narrative of Flyboy, right? And to give true narrative to that character, that world, those characters, et cetera. And so that's sort of where it came from. And for those that don't know or didn't experience it, the idea was that you sort of walk into a gallery that was an in-world gallery. So in the world of Flyboy, there is a gallery and you're sort of implanted in it. Upon arriving, you get a newspaper in-world newspaper. And in the paper, there's articles, there's advertisements, and everything sort of ties back and correlates to what you'll view throughout the exhibition. So you walk through that gallery, and then kind of like Alice through the rabbit hole, right? There's a painting that's sort of blown out, and you enter in through that, and then you sort of are into the world of Nevermore and Flyboy. And, again, I wanted to feel as immersive as possible with the we were limited by, scale and budget. So doing, real commercials, like you entered in through a old school newsstand, right? And as a way of, an old school way of disseminating information. And so the radios in the newsstand had different ads playing on a loop. And, all of these things were created to give a sense that like this was a place that this was a lived in world, a lived in space. And so, it kind of served a few different functions. But the main one was to entertain and engage, right? For all ages, So again, you had the art side, the strictly art side, which was the gallery component, and then everything else was, it was art as well, but it was, stuff that you can actually touch, right? Climb on, and to me, that's a lot more fun than just, white walls and white wine and, Nothing wrong with that, but again, I just, been there, done that. I've experienced that as a creator and wanted to give more to, my audience.
Well, I mean, I think the extension, and this goes back to this idea that as artists, we always have these things bubbling in our heads. And for you, it was a natural extension of what these characters already were and what you needed to be doing as an artist. But also in that moment, we see now in hindsight the way in which artists came alive in a different way. So, initially I was like, I'm not doing nothing. This is great. And then that's 5 minutes. And then you're like, I'm secretly doing watercolors in the dark before my children wake up. Like each artist has such interesting stories. And so I think, again, just a nod to the level of ambition and vision all the time of like, no, you're gonna time tickets, and you're gonna, like, how is he gonna pull this off? We can't go anywhere, but we going to Nevermore, like, and then it was another world. It was hope. It was escape. It was something else to get invested in. So I know there was all those things, but it really did, I think, extend, people's ability to be away from the reality of what was going on and to take that risk to, to be in another space.
Well, it was only intended to run. So we opened, October 2019. It was intended to run for 6 weeks. We ended up going 6 months, and then we ran into COVID. Oh, COVID, and so, but we had a hell of a run. And again, it was just meant to be a blip, but it became something where people would come back, and we had a lot of return visitors, which wasn't the intention, but it was great. And I think that there was a lot of things for a lot of different people, right? A big part of the research for doing it was to do a bit of revisionist history for Chicago as well. And so, you had an older audience that would come and get a completely different experience based on certain things that we had around the place that they connected to from their past. And then a younger audience that was just like, oh, this is cool, colors, fun, And so, again, it was a thing for everybody. Bring the whole family down to Nevermore.
Which is better, Chicago or LA?
Is
no, don't answer.
I can totally answer that question. Chicago.
But you left us, no. Talk a little bit about...
It's too cold. It's too cold.
Come on.
I didn't know global warming would take effect so fast, though, right after I left. Y'all don't even have winters no more, I heard.
And LA is mild. 65 degrees.
It's mild. It's actually colder in LA
than it is
here right now. So, yeah.
But talk a little bit about what it means, that something about the title is representation, whatever. And I was thinking of kind of 90s represent, right? What does it mean to represent two places? And then also, what is LA? You've gone there for a certain ambition, but what do you think it's infused or even brought out that you resist? What is LA doing to the way you think about the work from a creative standpoint? We know from a strategic standpoint or moving into ideas about content, but do you drive around what's wrong with these people? And you're drawing it, does it change the color palette? What does LA really you know, like, where do you feel like that's kind of funneling into the way you think about things?
I think more than anything, it just allows me happiness. And like in Chicago, I grew up here, you know, and in Chicago, you know, we all know at a certain point from, I'll be generous and even say like January to May most times, you know, the skies are gray, it's cold. I don't function well, I realized. And I think as I got older, I realized that like, it's not good for my creativity. Like you know, it takes me a long time to get going. And, you know, being out there allows me more opportunities to, you know, if I want, if it's February or March and I don't want to work in the studio that day, but I still want to work, I can go someplace else, be outside, you know, and kind of catch a vibe and go. And so I think that that's the biggest upside to LA, honestly. And, you know, quality of life for my kids where they can be out and you know, I don't have to throw on 3 layers of clothes and do that whole dance. But, you know, other than that, I mean, I'm in Chicago all the time. I mean, it's great to be here. And, but again, there's just that. But I will say this, every time I come back to Chicago, it's like, I'm not even joking you, as soon as I like hit that airport, right? As soon as I come through over here, my like spidey senses are going to the point where like, oh shit, that's a dope idea. Oh, that's a dope, like, and I'm just, you know, and a lot of times I'll end up, you know, friends, family want to see me, like, what are you doing tonight? And I'm working, you know, like, because I'm so inspired by being back, right, you know, in Chicago. So, you know, it still functions that way, you know, but yeah.
So we're about to hit Q&A. Is there anything you want to disclose? I made that up. There's not really anything, but is there anything you want to tell this audience first?
Well, I want to just thank everybody for being here on a Saturday, because you didn't have to be. So thank you for that, but nothing to disclose at the moment, other than, hold on, actually I do have something. I have a very large exhibition here next year, next spring. It's probably the largest that I've ever done, very ambitious. Some might say too ambitious.
You have 135 canvases, so I'm not worried.
Yeah, but this is more like, so this will be a combination of installation, painting, sculptures, and short films.
And wallpaper.
With wallpaper, yes, ma'am. Just for Amanda.
Can you tell us where it is, or is that secret
that's sort of the
okay,
mysterious
so
part.
stay
TBD,
tuned.
yes, stay tuned.
So we're gonna jump to Q&A. We have some helpers with microphones. So just raise your hand and we will come to you. Have somebody right here.
No questions? Great.
No?
See you guys later. All right.
I would just like to know if you could expand more on your characters, just to learn a little bit more of like what inspired, a little bit more about their inspiration, a little bit more specific on
Sure.
Flyboy and Lil Mama.
And before you start, there's a beautiful publication by Rizzoli outside that tells a lot also. He's gonna give us some good stuff. And he will be signing books after, so go.
Boom. That was a great plug.
See?
Thank you.
Keep me around.
Yeah, we work so well together. Well, with Flyboy, like I was saying earlier, a lot of the inspiration is borrowed from the Tuskegee Airmen, and just again this idea of, you know, heroism, and you know, within, you know, popular art, you know, a lot of artists appropriate and have appropriated, you know, characters sort of, you know, that are in the zeitgeist. So like, you know, the Mickey Mouses and things of that nature. And for me, that never felt, no knock on them, but that didn't feel like my way in, and that didn't feel, it never resonated in a way where it you know, it caught me. It just felt like a copy of a copy, just, you know, put through the machine a little different. And so I wanted to create my own, or have my own characters that I could use, you know, in similar ways. And so Flyboy, if I'm drawing comparison, could be like Mickey, and Lil Mama could be many in that way. But I think Lil Mama's probably the most important in the way that, like, I grew up, my mother had 8 sisters, so I had a lot of aunts, and I grew up around, you know, a lot of women, was raised by women, and then even in my neighborhood over here, that's all I had, you know, like, there was very few boys my age, and so it was like hanging out with bossy ass, know-it-all, moody, very tough young ladies. And, you know, the idea of Lil Mama kind of came from that, and trying to, you know, infuse that power, that prowess that, you know, young black women have into that character. And then thirdly, you know, I have the character Phoebe. It's the kid with the little frog helmet on, and that kind of came from something different. The idea of a black kid wearing something as ridiculous as, you know, like a Kermit the Frog head, was more from my own personal experience as a black man. You know, as I start to travel into different spaces, like I'm 6'8", and so, you know, one of the things that I noticed was, you know, how people noticed me and how different people noticed me. And, you know, I found myself at times trying to make other people, and again, I'm a very nonviolent dude, I'm chill, but I found myself at times trying to make other people feel comfortable when I stepped into a space. And, you know, it didn't sit right with me, right? I should only have to present myself as I am and take it or leave it. And so, you know, I'd had these conversations with friends, and I have a few friends that are, you know, darker skin. And we were out one time, and one of my friends was hurt, and he basically was like, yo, you go in there and ask for help, because they're not gonna help me, I'm too dark. And so the idea of like somebody coming that's, you know, sort of peacocking and wearing something that's so disarming, right? Something that's, it almost harkens back to Step and Fetch It, or, you know, blackface, like the acceptable, you know, way to sort of view us is in this way, and it's palatable. It's, oh, I understand you now. So it's kind of a nod towards that, if that makes any sense. So, you know, those are 3 of the main characters.
All right, I have another question over here.
Hello, I really appreciated what you said about like growing up in Bronzeville, really like being able to see the history around you, and then also like a lot of what you were talking about was inspiration from murals, and I really resonated with that because art museums aren't always like the most accessible, but I grew up like walking around and seeing the murals in Bronzeville, and they kind of remind me of your work because so many of them are inspired by history, or things that have happened in the neighborhood, and that honestly inspired me to begin showing off the murals in Bronzeville through my own tour company. But I wanted to know, what murals or art did you see in Bronzeville as a child, or just like while you were here, that might have inspired you?
That's a good question. Well, some unfortunately aren't here anymore. I've lived over here since I was 8 years old. And so I think probably from about maybe 35th to 45th, maybe, there were, you know, some of the residue, right, of, you know, a time past. And, you know, they echoed from everything from your typical MLK, Martin Luther King, to, you know, deeper historical Afro-Cobra, you know, works. And then obviously as you go further, you know, in South Shore, there's a lot more. And so that was sort of my path between, you know, home, school, and my grandmother's house, is what kind of informed a bit of my taste, right? And with those murals, again, they had such like vibrant color, and the palettes just always felt different, right? They were never really muted, and that's what caught my eye. So I don't know if there's like a specific one, but it was, again, and forgive me because I don't know what is still existing and what was kind of, you know, been lost to time, but, you know, it was sort of between that space.
Hello. Hi, Amanda. Hi, Hebru. I have two questions. So one is kind of couched in a comment, which is a big thank you to you and your studio practice. Two of my sons, Kari and Kahari, were interns with you at the time, and it was such a valuable experience for them. I'm curious if you are still engaging with young artists in your studio in LA. And then my second question is, every time I pass your old studio, I think next time I see Hebru, I'm going to ask him if we can activate that with some mural work on the exterior of your building.
It's me and you, Dorian. Let's do it.
Well, the second question, we were just talking about that, so yes, we could definitely talk afterwards. But yeah, I try to as often as possible. I think it was easier in Chicago because there weren't many other artists like myself doing it. And I also started in Chicago before I even had a practice. I was teaching at Little Black Pearl. And so, it was a lot of spillover from that time. And, I knew a lot of the younger kids. And, obviously your two wonderful sons. And some illustrations I still have to this day. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, I try to. I think it's more about sort of doing setting up times to speak at schools with different organizations, and then I'll usually get 4 or 5 kids after that. And what I'll do is I'll either have them by the studio or I'll try to help advise them on getting that bump in their career, getting started, and giving them a little direction.
All right, I have another one over here.
I have a question about the art scene when you were coming up and the art scene now, and hoping that you could describe sort of what it was before when you were coming up and how you would describe it today, the Chicago art scene specifically.
That's a good question too. You guys are good, you're really good. Okay. I think, and again, this is my perception, so don't hold me over the coals for this, but I felt, and I've said this a lot, like, Chicago is sort of the middle child, right? And culture has always sort of been sort of brought inward, right? From LA to, New York into Chicago. And for a lot of things, whether it's, music, art, and so forth. And I felt like when I got here, we were kind of in a space where we weren't, we were trying to act like the cool kids, like the big brothers, but we weren't there yet. And, again, there were people in the space that were actively pushing and, bringing it here. But then there was just a lot of, like, it was decorative BS. It was like, I need this matches, this ties the whole living room together. Let's, this piece works wonderful. So it was a lot of that, is what I found. That's me personally. But at that time, I mean, there was only like, Theaster was starting up. Carrie was here already. Carrie was Carrie. And, Rashid was in New York. And so he would grace us every blue moon. But, primarily it was Chicago still trying to find its own identity within the space.
And what do you think now?
I mean, I think we do a pretty kick-ass job. But I also think that, and as I say this, I'm one of the artists that left, but I think that Chicago has, begun to really cultivate its artists and its art scenes and, their practices in a way that didn't happen before, right? And so I think that obviously that's, a big factor as to why it feels, so robust now and so different.
I think we have time for one more.
Got one more right here.
All right.
While I don't know if this is a great question or a selfish question, I'm a collector as well, sneakers, what have you, music. And I have 3 of your T-shirts, and I want to know I tried to buy one of your prints at a time. I get ran over online by this stuff. I'm not fast enough, clearly, so I need a way to be able to do that, whether we trade numbers, bump into each other on the street, whatever. I'm in LA a lot, so, I can come to LA, whatever you need, Hebru.
Well, I got you. We'll talk after.
Okay, one more, and this lovely woman here is waving her hands. We're best friends right there. Yep.
Hello. I was wondering if you could speak to the artist who's creating a lot, hoping that something hits, and then something sells and is finally paying the rent, but it's the art that they hate making. Do you have words for us?
Yes. Come with the question.
You want to take that one first?
I feel it. I want to hear your answer. But I feel that. I had a traumatic moment recently, so I want to hear this.
Is the question... Wait,
like, what do you do when you make the thing that's kind of okay, but everybody's like, whoa, and then they get it, and then they're like, where are the next 12 of that? And you're like, I don't.
So
is
like,
that kind of right? Like, and the rent is being paid with the piece. Like, so you making 12 uhs, or are you like, no?
The uhs are making the money.
Yes.
But the
yes.
is the thing that everybody wants. Is that?
No, the ah's in you, but nobody's seen that, or they're not really checking for that.
Oh, shit, I don't know. I don't know. I honestly, I don't. Like, I think it's one part, preparation, one part luck. And I think, it's one of those things. I know how I was able to kind of break through, but it's different for everyone.
I mean, I think we've lucked out the and the ah's the same thing.
Yeah.
But I heard Kara Walker mention that she was tired of the silhouettes. And then people were like, we don't like those puppets. When is the silhouette coming back? And then she was at a point where, yes, it was paying the rent, but she could take that risk. But that is a real struggle.
Well, I can speak to that too, because, again, like a Kara, I mean, obviously I'm no Kara, but like doing things sort of that feel repetitious, right? For the sake of
paying the rent.
I know it's gonna sell.
Yeah.
Right. It does become very boring, and I think these past 2 years have been really challenging for me because I've been fighting that so hard. Where like, I told you I get bored, and I want to do things that I feel like are innovative and new, and it's hard because there's an expectation that is weighted on you of the next work needs to look like the last work, or maybe just the elevated version, wash, rinse, repeat. And so I don't know. I think that for me, it's been a thing where I found success in slowly eking out the other stuff, right? The stuff that and people being receptive, right? It's like, as long as I still got a little, it's over here. The ooh, the is, and so, and it's kind of, what I'm leading towards with the new stuff, where there's a hint of the old, but primarily this is, I think artists, it's tough because I feel like artists should be allowed to evolve in a way, right? And some artists are really good at their evolution because it's very, very calculated, and especially musicians. When you look at how an artist can transform from album to album, it's still that artist, but there's an elevation or there's an evolution to the work, and you don't typically get to see that be a success within fine art as much, right? Because there is an expectation of that thing. I don't know. I'm pro just do the shit that you want to do, and it'll find an audience.
Excellent.
Yeah.